Hi. So if you plan to work with an agency, with a freelance, with developers in general, maybe these tips that I'm going to share with you today can save your company. When you have someone that develop an application, as example, or maybe even something, it could be the same for graphic design, etc. There are two formats of the created software or the created drawing, etc. They are source code. So source code are language, are format that you can understand as human, that you can modify, and that you can maybe evolve over time. And they are compiled solution. The compiled version are the language that are understandable for the computer to run. So it is not something that you can edit. It's not something that you can modify over time. And then if you plan to develop or to switch your provider to build a new team, etc., if you don't have access to source code, you are stuck. And you need to restart from scratch all your development. And that's the reason number one for conflict between providers, freelancers, agencies, tech in general, and business owners. That's the source code properties. So here are the theory. If you plan to develop a software, and that's exactly the same with design, by the way. With design, you can have the finished design, like a JPEG file that you can put on your website, and you can have the Photoshop file that you can edit, modify, etc. It's much easier to modify the source code than working directly with the deliverables. So that being said, if you plan to create a software, if you plan to create an application, web application, whatever, knows that although some language are what we call scripting, nowadays, most of the scripting language can also be compiled and then not really modify. We cannot modify them as a developer if we do not have access to the source code. So that being said, when you create a software, the first things to do is to create your own, as a business owner, source code repository. This is like a Google Drive document or like a Dropbox document, but for developers. It's not the same technology. It's used the technology Git, Git. So this software is really special for source code repository because it will allow developers to come back to any version of their source code. So every time a developer finished something new, he push his code. That's how we call that. He push the code on the repository. And then we have all the versions since the beginning, line by line. And we can analyze everything that has been done by developers. Even if there are several developers to work on the same project. There are basic rules to follow in that case. So if you plan to build your own software application, you need to first create your source code repository. I recommend you to use Bitbucket, BIT bucket, and then to create your account. It's free up to 5 developers, and it will allow you to get access to what your developers does on a daily basis. And that's great because, by the way, even if you do not understand a single line of code, you can still have some clue on what they are working on thanks to comments in the source code as well as to the file name, etc. So that's a great thing. And you can also know if they left the project for a few weeks because you will know on daily basis what they do. And if they stop working, you will be able to see it. And you can also count the amount of line, etc., etc. There are a lot of graph and statistics that you can have access to on this type of software. So once you have that source code repository, that's the theory, but it's not enough. The second step is to convince your provider, your agency, your freelance, your developers to work on daily basis on this repository. Because there are lots of old school mindsets and old school providers who will tell you, yeah, I'm going to just give you the source code once we finish the project. No. Disagree about that, because if you run into conflict, if you have something that you disagree with, that they can force you to pay everything just to get access to the source code. And you will, because you don't want to waste all the project, right? So very important to ask to your developers to commit on your source code repository, to push their source code on daily basis, at least weekly basis, so that you can always have access to source code and you can ask some extra help. If at some point you want to have feedback on how your source code has been structured, and if this is a long-term source code or if it's a bit kind of crappy things, you can ask to people like us. We can tell you how good your software is, and if you will be able to keep it over years, or if it's just something that is going to work for 6 months or on 1 year, and after you will have to restart from scratch. And talking about the old mindset, some providers will tell you, no, I am not going to deliver you the source code until you finish to pay the entire project. And in that case, here are what you should, how you can change their mind. You're going to tell them, okay, listen, I want to work with you. I think you can deliver the software, but like if you would build a house, I would like to pay you on deliverables. So instead of having a whole deliverables for the entire thing, basically, like if it's like you would pay for an entire house and have the key to your house only once it's finished. Technically speaking, that's what you should have. But usually, if you build a house, you will pay an initial amount on the beginning, then maybe a bit more once the foundation are finished, once the wall are finished, when there is a roof, and when the inside is finished, etc., etc. So same thing with softwares. You can pay an initial amount of to just commit to the project, etc. And usually that's not a big deal because this is not on the first steps that you will run into conflict. So you can pay 20-30% of the entire deal, the entire contract. Then you move on, and once they reach like 50% of all the features that are expected, then you pay up to the 50% of the total amount. And always pay for what has been done and delivered on the source code repository. And it's only when it's finished, tested, so then that you can maybe pay like 90% of the project, you test it, you put it in production, and then you pay the 100. And you will always have access to the source code if anything happens. You know, maybe sometime your developers can have an accident. They can, I don't know, go bankrupt, etc. We never know. So always be sure that you have access to what has been developed, especially if we talk about big amount of like 10, 20, 30, even more thousand euro or dollars. You absolutely need to get access to your source code. So I hope it will help you. Maybe it's by chance it's going to save you a lot of headaches and difficulties. I've met so many projects with that did not have access to the source code. And even if we are very strong, technically speaking, even if you can find the best developers in the world, they will be able to do nothing except restarting from scratch if you don't have access to source code of your application. So very important things to remember. I wish you a great day, and I will see you very soon for another tips to lead your digital project. See you then. Bye.